The Pediatric Lounge, a podcast taking you behind the door of the physician's lounge to get a deeper insight into just what docs are talking about today. From the clinically profound to the wonderfully routine and everything in between. Hi, George. It's Tuesday morning, and we're back with a podcast. It's good to see you.
Yeah, it's good to see you. Today we have the famous or infamous Brandon Beatqourt. He's going to talk to us today about a topic that's very interesting, practice culture, why it's important for the financial growth and development of a pediatric or any kind of a private practice.
Welcome, Brandon. It's a
Thank you very much. I
appreciate
very much having you guys having me on.
Yeah.
Wanted to start, we always ask, like, what was your educational background? How did you end up being a guru of pediatric practice management?
Well, I started out in my university as a marketing. I wanted to be like a marketing executive. That's kind of what I wanted to focus on. But my dad we always came from an entrepreneurial family. My dad never really worked for anybody. Always had his own business. My uncles, same thing. So I always had that urge in me. And then eventually transitioned over to business, and then got a master's degree. And then a few years into that, my wife, who's a pediatrician, decided that she was unhappy with the group that she was with and wanted to open up her own practice. And then that was in between jobs at the time. And I said, well, since I'm sort of the marketing business person, let me help you out and get this thing up and running. And then 19 years later, I'm still managing the practice, and then I do consulting on the side, I guess, because my primary job was a practice manager, and then I do the consulting as a side gig. Although sometimes it's like 80-20, 80% consulting, 20% practice management, and then sometimes it's the other way around, where I'm doing 80% practice management and then 20% consulting.
So were you just shocked about how cumbersome and backwards the business of medicine is in America?
Was I shocked, like how business was in America?
No.
Sorry,
like,
how the healthcare was in America?
Yeah. Like when you come
business?
from an MBA and then you start looking at all the nonsense we do.
Sure.
We have no choice. I mean, you just have to do it. But
I remember the first sort of realization. It was just the first week after we opened, and dealing with the paper charts, and then how you have to, just to put one piece of paper in. First of all, you have these daggers that come up, right? That in these paper charts. And then you had to be very careful because those things were sharp, but then you had to take out virtually the entire deck of whatever it was, that was in there.
yes.
And then just for one little piece of paper, and then obviously put it in there. And then God forbid that somebody sort of moved the hole puncher, and then all of a sudden, your paper was not quite aligned, and then it would cover the tabs, because you'd have, you guys probably remember, your
Yes.
progress note, labs, referrals or whatever, like you had your different tabs, and then it would cover the tab, the different tabs, and I remember thinking there's got to be a better way. I cannot believe that this is the system. And so that prompted us immediately to start looking for EMRs. And then back then, this is nearly 20 years ago, EMRs of course were around, but they weren't obviously as prevalent as they are now. But I'm like, there has to be a better way, because I had worked with software before in other capacities. So but that was one of my first realizations of, like, this is just absolutely crazy. And then another one before we even started was going to a coding class the very first time, and
Yes.
then hearing that, and I didn't understand anything, nothing, right? Everybody was talking in these, this language of numbers, right? CPT codes.
Yes.
And everybody was so well versed. And I remember panicking, because all I knew was Joanna had told me, my wife, she told me, hey, we need to go to this seminar, because I'm like, what is it about? And she said, it's how we get paid. That's all she said. It's how we get, it's pretty important. I'm like, okay, I guess let's go. This is before we had opened. And we had arrived late, and then I walked in, and I'm like, I thought I stumbled upon like a foreign language department, like a foreign language seminar, and I'm not catching anything, but I'm like, well, Joanna at the time had only been out of residency for like 3 years at that time. So I'm like, this is probably fresh in her mind. That's what I thought. I'm like, surely there's a book somewhere in the house where she did a rotation in the CPT code business, right? That was kind of my assumption. And when I looked, but I leaned over to her and I said, "Hey, are you getting this?" Because I'm not, because I wanted to let her know that I wasn't, and I didn't get a response. So I leaned in a little bit more, and I'm like, "Hey, are you getting this?" And I didn't get a response. And when I looked over, and I saw this face of just like she's trying to cram for an exam and trying she's trying to absorb everything, and she replies back a little, like somewhat, or she started, and then my panic began again. And then 2 weeks after that, I went to the community college and found billing 101, and I enrolled into that thing and did all the way up to whatever the certification was. I didn't do the certification because I was like, forget it, I don't need that. I just need to learn this stuff. And that was another sort of rude awakening in terms of like how this whole thing works. At first I used to treat it as it was a healthcare. I wouldn't call it a business, it's healthcare. And then after all these different scenarios happened, I'm like, no, wait a minute, this is a business. This is actually a business, just like the dry cleaner is a business, just the way Google is a business, just the way, the local leadership is a business. And then that's sort of what started I'm like, well, I think I can do this. Like, I think I have the skill set in order to, even though I don't know nothing about medicine per se, or how this business works, I know how businesses work. So I think, not that I was an expert, but I mean, at least I had the fundamentals.
What did you use as the revenue cycle management piece in the beginning, like 20 years ago?
I don't think it existed.
No.
Huh?
We did. We had well, the first 6 months we didn't have any EMRs on paper, so I relied on. Old timers will know the system. I can't remember. It was a very prominent system.
Metasoft or Lightel?
No, it might have been Metasoft, but it was like an old school PM system. I think it was like DOS based, and so I would get printouts. And then, of course, everything was like a month late. So it was like when I would talk to somebody about a balance, I didn't know if they had sent payment already or not, So I'm like, this system isn't very good. And then eventually we moved to a system called Elegance at the time. Now I think they transitioned to another name called NB Suites. And then I don't know what it's called now, but and so that's what I started using, and it had a pretty good, robust reporting capabilities. And so just sort of intuitively, I started figuring out how what I thought was important to start measuring. And to this day, I still have very strong feelings because I sort of came into this without necessarily growing up in it, or like my career. I was just sort of already midlife, sort of, or early mid, I don't know, was sort of when I jumped into this. So it wasn't like I started from that this was my career path from the very beginning. So I tended to look at things very differently from the very beginning. So
yeah, but I think a lot of physicians go through what you're going through because they're business owners, and they're also trying to see patients and save lives. It makes it more complicated.
And I mean, hats off to them. I don't know how they do it. We're fortunate in that I'm able to spend 100% of my time to dedicate 100% of my time to the numbers, to the business side of the practice. And then Joanna, my wife, she has the luxury of spending 100% of her time in patient care. So, and I know that's not true of everybody, right? Right. Especially if you're a small practice. So, one of the people that I tend to like to help the most are like the Joannas of the world, so my wife's of the world that they're big enough to sort of, be able to have something going on, as far as, the business, money, the staff, but obviously not big enough to hire somebody that, with a background in business and marketing and then with an MBA, because they wouldn't be able to afford it. Now, if you got a practice of maybe 10, 12 doctors, 15 doctors, 20, whatever, they can afford it, to bring somebody in with the business capability. So I sort of have a sweet spot there that, I tend to like when I do all of my consulting. I tend to focus that. And it's also in my wheelhouse too, right? I feel more comfortable in that as opposed, not that I've gone to practices that are large practices, so not that I can't contribute to that. And we can talk a little bit about that because we're talking about culture, and that's where a lot of problems are created when these organizations are bigger. So we can get to that, but yeah, so that's sort of a long way of answering your questions on how to.
Yeah, no, the reason I asked is that we were talking about the paper charts. 20 years ago, when I used Metasoft would not spit out a single report in Excel or comma delineated. Every report was in the PDF.
Well,
Or
at least you got a PDF. I would get a printout.
and then you gotta, well, I got a workaround. So you could add this thing to Microsoft where the print button would go to a PDF, and then you would have to transcribe the darn thing into spreadsheets to see what was going on.
Well, now they have programs that can transpose PDF into a spreadsheet.
Right.
Yeah,
right.
but now the data comes out,
Yeah, back then,
delineated.
yeah, you had to type it all in,
There was
which
always
I did.
hacks. There was
I did
always
a lot.
hacks. But
And
remember
then-
back then, remember, this may be before your time, Herb, definitely before Brandon's time, but I found old charts from the 50s and 60s, where they had one yellow piece of paper that had about 30 office visits on it. OM, a mox. That was your visit. And I think all these problems that happened is because medical legal, you had to write bigger and bigger notes. So probably when Joanna came, she was already trained in writing bigger notes, and the complexity of everything was more complicated. The billing was more complicated. Before they used to write a little sentence, they'd send out a bill, 99213, and they get paid. Well, they got paid with cash.
Well, yeah, so in 1998, 1997,
That's when all the
99,
problems started.
That's when the government came out with the coding guidelines.
Yeah.
And the bullet points. And so you had to
Yeah.
do this many things in order to charge for a 99214.
Correct. Yeah.
And that created a bunch of paperwork.
Yeah.
So
Well, I've always said real quick about that. I've always said that, and I wasn't in that time. And I've heard old timers say that, that they would have 3x5 cards, right? That would be so I've heard old timers talk about that as well. But if you think about it, going back to the business aspect of it, like one thing that I figured out from the very beginning is that, like, I do a talk on collections, and one of the things that the question that I pose is, what business are we in? And everybody's like, oh, I'm taking care of children, like they always focus on that. And I'm like,
Service business.
The physician, well, no, I said we are in the collection business. We are in the collection business because the provider, yes, he's in the business of taking care of children. That's fine. I'll give you that. But everybody else, because I'm talking to, usually managers and stuff like that, the entire system is designed for collection. So it does not make you a better clinician to know what CPT, like that doesn't help you in any regard, right? Even the diagnosis, the actual code, the diagnosis code doesn't tell you anything because, there's a name associated. So one of the things that I realize is when when they do like morning reports, or when physicians are telling another physician, they're telling about a case, like, hey, I got this kid. Within 2 sentences, the other physician already knows what's going on, right? It's just sort of like these little information. So then, like, that humongous note is not necessary. And but why do you write that note? It's to justify the collection. So why do we ask for why do we ask for an address? There's nobody else asks for an address in another business. You go to a grocery store, they ask for an address. You go to dry cleaners, they don't ask. It's so we know where to send the bill. That's the only reason we ask for that. We ask, obviously, the card, the insurance card. That's so we know where to bill it. And so I don't know. I've never done the ratio, but I'm guessing 85% of all the data that we got, it's all for collections. So that's like, we are in the collection business. And if we don't do it appropriately, then we don't get paid. And then so the doctor cannot do what he's good at, he or she is good at, which is, take care of kids. They're in that business, but so that's their local, but we are the coal for the locomotive that ensures that they continue doing that. So that's sort of my whole spiel in terms of how important collection is, because the entire thing is set up for collection. So we are in the collection business. Those of us in the admin, that's what I want to say. Those of us in the admin. I'm sorry I cut you off there.
No, that's all right. I think the whole doctor's also in the collection business, because as you pointed out, I have to write all this stuff that doesn't add any value to the note, and pick up CPT code and pick out an ICD-10 code just so the bill can get paid. Right. And if I could spend those 5 minutes seeing more patients, I could help more people, but I can't.
Right.
Because I won't get paid, and then I'd be out of business.
Exactly.
So it's a very cumbersome. Anyhow, so what is pediatric practice culture, and how does that impact not only the financial growth, but I think the well-being of any practice?
So the culture, not necessarily in a pediatric, in a pediatric offices. This is true of any organization, any small group, church, synagogue, whatever the case might be. But essentially, is how people behave, or how people behave inside of an organization. And again, that organization can be a nonprofit, it can be a practice, it could be a church group, it could be anything. So when a group of people come together, exactly what are the norms? How do we behave? What is celebrated? What is frowned upon? Sort of all these norms that kind of go into it, and ultimately, in terms of the business side of it, is aligning that culture, those values, in order to give direction, to gives a sense of purpose, right? And then also to create a collaborative environment where we're all on board, rowing in the same direction. So that's sort of a general, broad statement in terms of what culture is, and how it helps the people. So, and how it helps the organization is that when you are aligned culturally, and this is sort of the premise, I'm going to kind of give you the punchline, is that when you are aligned culturally, meaning that you are behaviorally and intellectually aligned. That's another aspect of the culture. When you are intellectually and behaviorally aligned, then it really is the last competitive advantage. So the one thing that distinguishes you from everybody else. If you think about businesses, and since we're in the business of pediatrics, we were talking about CPT codes. We have reporting systems. We've got seminars that teaches us how to code correctly. Other seminars that that tell us how to use the system more efficient. So we've got all these areas. Let's say IT or EMR, accounting, finances, even HR. Let's say. It's very difficult to become much more competitive in those areas. They're important and you need to monitor them, but there's only so much savings you can do, right? I mean, you can only cut so much of expenses. At some point, there's nothing more. And there's also, in this business in particular, the capacity to grow depends on the number of doctors that or providers that you add. So there is no economies of scale. There is no way to streamline the distribution line. For example, like an Apple can streamline the distribution and then maximize the revenue that they make for every iPhone. Here, actually, cost increases as a result of seeing more patients, as opposed to every other industry. It's the other way around. Cost decreases as you increase production, right? So anyways, so when you have that area of the business, which people refer to it as the smart side of the business, because it generally focuses on the decision sciences. There's only so much that you can do there. And by the way, everybody else can do it just as good as you, because everybody has access to it. If you're the only one with an EMR, well, perhaps, if you were the only one with a recall system, okay, or an inventory management system, fine. But it's available now, to everybody. Coding, it's available to everybody. So to being competitive in that aspect of it is really not that. You're not going to get the same return on investment that you would on what I refer to as the human side, or the people side of the business. So that's where the culture comes in. And when the culture is aligned, you're able to leverage that, and it truly becomes a competitive advantage, because there's nothing that you cannot achieve when you have the right people on the bus, right? Or you have the right people rowing and everybody's rowing in the same direction. There's nothing that can come to you, or at least you have more of a chance to overcome any of the challenges that come your way when the people are aligned. And you have a strong culture, and people understand what the vision, the mission, what their purpose is, what's expected of them, what is cool, what is not cool, what we accept, what we don't accept, what we celebrate, what we don't celebrate. When everybody's clear about that, then that's truly the money then will follow, essentially, because you have everything else lined up.
So what you're saying is the tools today are available pretty much to anybody. The right. EHRs, the recallers, the schedulers, and all that kind of stuff. You have to have the right people that are able to use these tools in an efficient way to increase, to make better work plans and processes. But in medicine, as you know, doctors tend to make things more complicated with more things. Right?
So it's not only have the right, so we're not talking just about skill sets, because skill set is obviously important, but it's not just a matter of skill set. It's also, that's why I said intellectually and behaviorally aligned.
Mhm.
So you need you probably, I always say this, like I'm the one guy in Chicago that probably could care less about sports, but I like you to use sports references. Um, it's not just, how many times do you see a sports player, in professional sports do awful in a team? Like he's a star, but on paper, all the statistics, everything does very well. It doesn't perform very well in that team. Then gets traded and all of a sudden, like outshines everybody, the best player, like all this. So what was it? Was it that the employee in this case, because they're an employee, wasn't capable, didn't have the tool set, didn't have the skill set, or was there something about the team that he or she was able to fit in? It was a better culture fit that allowed that person to kind of rise to the top. Or oftentimes you see teams that are high performing teams because they have a whole bunch of stars, and statistically if you look at this, the underdogs, the ones that don't have any stars, generally tend to outperform the ones that have the stars. And the reason is because generally speaking, they'll have a much stronger culture, like less ego and more, well, we can get into what it takes to have a strong culture, but it's essentially, yeah, it makes
So,
things more complicated. But if you're well complemented and you have skill sets, so again, in sports team, not everybody's a pitcher. There's a
right.
certain, or even in a band, we got the guitars back there. Not everybody can be the lead guitar player. Not everybody can be the singer. The drummer is just as important, or even in an orchestra where you've got, a whole
Yeah.
bunch of instruments.
So
Very important.
Chip Hart talks about that because he's a data fanatic and he loves baseball. And you take a team like the New York Yankees that pay tons and tons of money for the best players from all over the world, and they're beaten by teams that don't have that budget just because they have a much stronger culture. They don't just go for the big money players. And we had the opposite here in DC. We had a wonderful franchise called the Redskins that was very well led, and they won Super Bowls. And then we got a new owner, Dan Snyder, and the way he treats his employees and the way he treats the players, they haven't won in 20 years. They can't. I mean, and those players, when you're at the NFL level, like you said, they're all superstars. You don't get to put a uniform of an NFL team if you are not incredibly talented, disciplined, phenomena football player. But the culture of that organization is so toxic that they can't win.
Yeah.
They will never be able to win. Doesn't matter how much money they spend, they won't be able to win.
Yeah.
So culture is very
Exactly.
important.
And
So
if you
Where,
look
where
at
do you think the
coaches,
culture starts in medicine?
I'm
it's
glad you're asking that question, because when I give the talk about culture, the doctors will tell me, this is a great talk. You need to talk to my managers or my
No,
supervisor.
it's the
I'm like,
doctor.
no, I was talking to you,
Yep.
the leadership. So the culture starts at the top. So here's the thing about culture. You are going to have a culture, whether you focus on it or you don't focus on it. If you give two hoots about it, you're still going to have a culture. And if you focus on it, you're going to have a much more desirable culture, right? So might as well have a much more desirable culture, right? Than as opposed to just let it go. So you will have a culture regardless, but the culture, and then it's either because of the leadership. In both instances, it's because of lack of leadership or it's because of great leadership, and that's where culture starts. It starts at the very top, and oftentimes, yeah, that's it. That's a point that I wish I could just, like, if anybody just drive home, it's that it starts at the top. And what I found, and you guys would be interested in what your thoughts on it, is that I've noticed that doctors in particular, they sort of feel comfortable being, in the leadership role with parents, with maybe their nurse, their clinical team. But then when they're business owner, they don't seem to assume or take it, have the understanding that they're the leader as the the way that we look at leaderships in an organization, right? So it's sort of like you are the CEO, no matter how small or big this organization is, you are essentially are the CEO, or the partnership, you're the board of directors, and then there's a managing partners. And so they don't view themselves as the leadership the way that other organizations says, yeah, he's the leader of this organization. Is that why is that? First of all, is that true? Right? That's sort of a hypothesis of mine. And number two, if it is true, then what do you think that is?
I think
Well,
it's true, but the reason it's true is because I guess the physician sees themselves as the captain of the team, but somehow this money and business is not part of medicine, so they kind of shy away from it. What do you think, Herb?
I have a different perspective. I think it's the way we indoctrinate physicians. So medicine is a very hierarchical. I call it the Catholic Church of professions. You have a pope who is the department chair, whatever department it is. Big Rush in Chicago, pediatric department. I am the chairman of the department. Every director of specialty care in that department answers to me, and I can fire them at will. And then the people that work under the directors report to the director. And in Chicago, the culture is even a little more toxic because at Rush, I don't know if it's true today, but when I was there, the chairmen of the departments at the hospital have a captain's chair table where they sit, and only the chairmen of the department can sit at the center table, and everybody else has to sit in other tables. And so the message is you may be a doctor, but you're not a leader. You follow the orders from the chairman. And if you don't follow my orders, I won't sign off on your boards, and you will never have practice. And I won't write you a letter of recommendation. You will never have a job. So you're not a leader. You do as I tell you to do, and you keep your little mouth shut. Because if you annoy me, your career's over. That kind of messaging does not create leaders.
Right.
It creates beaten down followers. And the hospital administrators have taken that playbook and use it to their advantage, so that they can be more profitable, and physicians have a lesser and lesser role in the care of patients.
So I can see that in the hospital setting, and I've often thought about that. The hospital setting is very hierarchical, very military structured, right? So it's like, even with the nurse, starting with the physicians and the nursing, and like on the floor, for example. I'm not sure, like on the administrative, but if let's assume that it is a military sort of structure. There's still team leaders, and that each leader is the leader of their little, of their team, right? So, but then it doesn't seem to when you take it outside of the hospital setting, and then so I understand the training, I understand that, but then when you're leading a practice, and you decided to be the owner of this practice and have autonomy and all these other things, right? Presumably that's why you opened the practice to begin with. Then it's sort of like, why not approach it the same way as that you were taught in the hospital, where there's a leadership. Now it's you, by the way, and then sort of run it the same way, where it's like, I'm going to continue. This isn't a democracy. This is, an autocracy, or whatever the case might be, and then we're going to run it. But now I'm the head honcho here.
Because that's what you learned. That's the kind of leadership that you learn in the hospital, and you're going to take it outside. So you have to change when you go outside.
Right.
It's called pivoting.
Right. Well, I find it that they don't do that pivoting, and therefore, like, when it comes to these sort of things, that's kind of my point. That they don't see themselves as leaders.
They don't.
So I often, and I'm looking for a better word, but I can't find it. It's like, it starts with the leadership, but when I say the leadership, they usually don't. It's like, oh, he's talking to me. Like he's talking, like they're thinking of somebody else. He's like, oh, I need to talk to my manager, or I need to talk to my practice administrator. I'm like, no, it's you. You're the one that's setting the tone for everything else. It's sort of like, if the parents are fighting, or if the parents are up here doing, like, even though you're doing it back behind closed doors, the kids still know. So if there's dysfunction at the top, it doesn't matter how well equipped your quote unquote leadership is, it's still going to trickle down. Yeah, because the way the kids know that the kid, mom and dad are not doing too well, even though they're having their discussions behind closed doors.
It's a very interesting phenomenon. Like, you talk to pediatricians, and we mostly talk to pediatricians, but when there's a problem, they always go, well, what does the American Academy of Pediatrics say about that? Well, what do you say about it? I mean,
You're right.
The American Academy of Pediatrics isn't seeing patients running any kind of practice across the country. So what do you say about it? What do you think about it? And they're like, well, let's see what the American Academy of Pediatrics says. And and that's that lack of leadership. They don't want to step up. And
it's interesting. Yes.
And
yes.
it's not, and we, again, from the time you're a medical student to the time you rid yourself of the chairman of the department by going to private practice, you're beaten down every day.
Yep.
Interesting.
And so the culture of medicine, unfortunately, is be a follower, not a leader. If you speak up, you become a disruptive physician and your career will end. And
Very
so
interesting.
it's better to keep your head down and obey the boss. That does not lead for independent thinking or leadership. And then the second thing we see in our coaching class is we are masters of one thing, pediatrics. And we're very good at it. But get me to repair my car, and I don't even know how to open the hood, right? Because I spent so much time mastering pediatrics. And so the people that have this vision of what they want their organization to look like feel so short on the management leadership skills because they've never been formally trained.
No, absolutely.
And they have this total fear of fail. So it's very interesting because I tell George this. George says, I never fail. I said, George, I fail so many times. I'm still like a kid. I punch buttons in my computer, see what happens. And failure is how you learn. Failure is how you grow. Failure is how you learn to lead people. But
you guys are all risk averse, though. I mean, like
that's right. But I can't practice.
Right.
I can't practice like that. Like I tell this, and people, it's a joke, but it's a bad joke. I go like, I can't say 9 patients died, but 1 survived, so I'm a success. But I could be a baseball player and only hit the ball 20% of the time and make a couple of $1 million. I could be a litigation lawyer and lose 9 trials and win a $50 million big one that 30% of that is, and I'm set for life. Or I can invest in 10 companies like PE does, have 9 go bankrupt, and 1 gets to market and sells for a couple of $1 billion, and I pocket 500 million. And I'm a success, and everybody celebrates it. Oh, wow, look at Herb. He knew how to invest in Uber before Uber was a thing. He's worth $2 billion now. No one says he also invested in 25 companies that no one remembers and that are gone.
Yeah.
And so the mindset of the indoctrination that goes to creating physicians from the moment they're medical students is failure is not allowed. You don't do anything that your forefathers have not done. You don't think outside the box. You're an obedient soldier of this war that we wage to keep people healthy. And if you want to laugh, I went to medical school in Costa Rica, and the first day of the psychiatry lectures, the chairman of the department asked me, what was normal? And I said to him, well, I guess normal is to be born. If you're lucky, you get sick, and eventually you die. That is the only experience every human, every animal, probably every plant, any living organism, and even every business experiences. Some are unlucky, they don't even get to be born. They die before they're born.
Yeah.
And he just went malicious. How could you be a doctor? Your job is to keep people healthy. I'm like, it's a great vision. It's not even a mission. It's a vision. Because the truth is, we're all dying. Every day you wake up, you're a day closer to your death. And no one's going to be able to prevent my death. It's going to happen. I just don't know when.
Yeah,
Hopefully
for
it's
sure.
quick. Hopefully
Right.
it's quick and you don't.
Yeah. Okay.
But you know what I'm saying? But the medicine is, no, we're going to keep you alive. No, we're not. We're going to prolong your life as much as we can, and hopefully it'll be a healthy and happy and enjoyable life.
Yeah.
But at some point, disease gets all of us,
Yeah.
and we're gone.
Mhm.
And that's not a failure in me. I can't see my life as I'm a failure as a doctor because this kid was born with congenital heart disease, is not going to make it past 1 year of age. I have no control of that.
Yeah.
I can do my best to take care of them for that year of age and be compassionate and, get them to the best care possible. But at the end of the day, unfortunately, I have no power to keep that kid alive. It's going to, what's going to happen is going to happen.
Yeah. Very, very interesting. Very interesting. The one thing though is lately, probably the last year or so, I've been coincidentally, I've been giving talks less about culture and more about the business side, the KPIs and stuff. And two things that kind of come to mind when you were mentioning, they always ask me, in fact, I have a slide prepared for this because they always ask me, they want to know what everybody else is doing. What sort of what's the evidence base, what's the
Yes.
practice management evidence base sort of equivalent, right? So they're like, what's the benchmark? What should be what should I look for? What's the baseline or whatever, right? It's sort of like, fever above this is a fever, below this, that's not fever.
Yes.
That's kind of like,
Yes.
where's the fever at, right? And I'm like, like I said, benchmarks are, so but it was interesting because they always want to know that, they always want to know what that is. So anyways, I'm not going to get into it right now, but I go into this thing about that benchmarks are good, but to some respects, but it's sort of like, again, like you're saying, what's normal, or even like what, if I say, the average male in the United States is 180 pounds, let's say, and then the alignment comes in, or let's say you don't know it's alignment. Somebody comes in at 350 pounds, and then which one's the healthy one, right? And it's like, well, it turns out if I give you a little bit more information, that the 350 pound guy is alignment for the bears, and that dude is jacked and nutrition, eats great, and with the other guy, I don't know, doesn't eat very well, smokes, drinks, I don't know, everything, back.
Yes.
So then what, then there's you guys understand what I'm saying.
No, absolutely.
Yeah, the benchmark thing and the wanting the wanting to know exactly, it doesn't. So I'm like, sort of apply it the same in your, like, where the kids in the 95th percentile or the 5th, it doesn't matter as long as they're tracking, as long as they're appropriately tracking on where they're doing. It doesn't matter.
So
if they're in the 95th or the 5th.
that becomes the art of medicine that we're losing sight of. Because
Right.
Yes.
you have the science, and the science is a computer algorithm that tells you this, that, and the other thing. And people are losing sight of thinking outside the box, thinking, oh, that guy is 200 pounds, but he is a football player and he's bulking up and he eats healthy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's
my point with go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
That's one big criticism of the BMI. The BMI doesn't really tell you anything. For the exact same reason you just pointed out. And in the business world, it's even worse because I can really, most of the time, massage the numbers to tell any story I want in the business world. So the way you put the numbers together can tell different stories.
Well, they say that 75% of statistics are made up on the spot.
Yeah.
Yeah, that could be. So to have a healthy, thriving culture, you have to start with vision, mission, and values.
Yes. I mean, yes, that would be one area where you can focus on. But before you get to that, you need to ensure that you are, Chip also, you mentioned Chip. Chip has a talk, and I only know the title. I haven't actually heard the talk, but it's like, are you working with the right people or something like that? Are you working with the wrong people? We talked about it, so I know what it's about, but I haven't actually heard it. And so before we get to that point, it's very important that the leadership team everybody's aligned, that there's a true, they can come together, and they came together for the right reasons. There's needs to be trust. There needs to be, and when I say trust, there needs to be a vulnerability-based trust. So it's not trust in terms of like, I trust that this person's going to come through. I trust this person's going to arrive on time. I trust this person's going to complete their charts. It's trust that I can be like, you're better at this than me. Like I need help. Like I'm vulnerable enough to go to this person to say, hey, I'm not very good at this, or I'm having trouble. I'm bogged down. Can you help me? Your skill set is better than this, than mine, or I can help you, or yeah, because of course, again, going back to that, now it makes a lot more sense. Going back to that environment, it's also a very competitive environment, right? And not often very, perhaps collaborative with your clinical staff, but not necessarily collaborative all the time with your peers, especially in medical school or a residency where it's just a complete competition, right? So anyway, so that now a lot of things are starting to come to perspective for me. But anyways, that's where it starts at the very beginning. So there needs to be, usually these groups, you have a partner, right? And then, or you have one partner, or at least partners. And that's why sometimes the solo practitioners generally do this a lot better, because it's only one person that, that sort of sets the tone, right? But when you have a group of people, then you need to establish that vulnerability-based trust. That's number one. And that's not very easy. And it takes a little bit of time, because if you don't have that trust, then you're not in a great position to deal with conflict, right? Because it's unavoidable. As much as we don't like to, and because we're pediatricians or whatever, we like to play nice, all these things, but conflict is very important. But you need to know how to handle conflict. So conflict resolution is very important. However, if you don't have the vulnerability-based trust, if you don't properly trust the person that you're dealing with, then conflict is not about the best idea wins, or it's more, it's about me trying to convince you, who knows, like all these different things because everybody's playing close to the chest, right? Because there's an agenda, or there's some resentment, or it's because you said this a long time ago and I didn't appreciate that. Well, that didn't get handled way back then. So then now I'm bringing this up, sort of like making it seem like it's something else, when underneath, sort of like the iceberg at the very top, it shows what the feelings are, but underneath there's like all this stuff that's been saved up. And then when there's not safe ground to have conflict and productive conflict, then people are not going to buy in, right? So again, going back to the sports team, they have conflict all the time. They yell at each other, they have this stuff, but it's all about, because they know what's in their best interest, and they're all there to do to do a job. So that conflict leads, and then there's buy-in. So imagine going to a team, or even an orchestra. Let's just change it in case somebody doesn't like sports here. If you're in an orchestra and you're going to be like, I don't like what the director chose to play, I'm going to play my own thing. It's like that, we're going to know that you're going to play your own thing, and then it's just not going to be, and it's not helping anybody out, right? So, but at the very least, there should be input, right? Buy-in from perhaps not everybody, but there are certain, section leaders, let's say, in an orchestra that will sort of buy, like, well, here's my recommendation, here are my notes, I think here's how we should do it. And then the director takes it in and then decides exactly how they're going to go about it. So then there needs to be an opportunity to weigh in. And then if there's not an opportunity for weigh-in, then people are not going to buy in to whatever it is that is agreed on. Then it's going to be very difficult to hold people accountable, right? Because there isn't all these things that have been created. So it's like, yeah, we've committed, but then somebody committed to complete their CME, or somebody committed to completing their charts. 80% of the charts should be completed on the same day, let's say, and then they're not. They committed to it, so therefore the team, the leadership team, should be able to be like, hey, what happened? You committed to this and you didn't come through. Normally, because the trust isn't there, and then how to deal with conflict and all this other stuff, then it's sort of an attack on me. It's like, why are you attacking me? Why are you on top of this? Did you not know? Did you not see my schedule? My schedule was full of behavioral health. And those things, you're scheduling me for 15 minutes, and that's that's a minimum of a 45-minute visit. Like, everybody starts getting very defensive. It's like, hey, wait. We're talking about your commitment that you're not keeping, right? And then measuring goals, like measuring, are we measuring what we need to measure and ensuring that we are moving forward, which is another thing that that we don't do very good. So to make a long story a little bit longer, all these things need to happen at the leadership level before you get to the vision, the mission, and all these other things, because there's going to be issues, especially the bigger the group is, in terms of deciding what the mission is going to be, what the vision is going to be, what are our values. So you need to have this vulnerability, this trust, this conflict resolution, all these things in place before so you can start hammering out what is it exactly that we are here to do.
So I got two questions there. So for a lot of the times, there is no team, like with your wife. Well, your wife had a team. It was you and her. But often the team, when you start a practice, is the doctor. That's it. No one else is coming along for the ride. And then the other thing happens is that practice has been around with two partners, and now they're looking at taking on a third partner. But the vision, the mission, the values have already, for better or worse, been settled upon. And there's always this push, I guess, tug, that the younger people want to change some of the mission of the organization. And the older people are like, well, it's working. It's making money. That's how we were able to hire you. Why would we change it? So, for the most part, when things are starting out, is one player and they put their stamp on the way they want that. How do you handle when the younger physicians come into a group and they want to start changing the vision and the values?
So in that regard, so let's go say a young physician wants to come in and start changing the vision and the mission and all this other stuff. That to me is a sign of poor leadership of the senior leadership. So they did not communicate clearly what the vision and the mission was to the younger physician. And so for the younger physician to decide whether or not this is a vision and mission that I want to subscribe to, or like this is the boat I want to jump onto. So the fact that the younger physician is trying to make change is already problematic, right? That there wasn't an earnest conversation there in terms of like, what are your values? It's like, well, I want to change the world. Well, we don't want to change the world, so therefore we're not a good fit. So thank you very much for coming. And so that's the conversation that should have happened. So that leadership, you're saying that they're set in their ways, the leader to settle upon. I would say that perhaps, but it was not, and that this is what I often find, that there is a culture, but it's not properly communicated, it's not properly expressed, it's not written down, it's not, and it's not reinforced. That's another big part about this, is that you constantly have to reinforce it, and you reinforce it by many different ways. But one of the things is how you hire is one way how you reinforce your vision and your mission. So, but let's go say part of your values is flexibility. Right? Let's go say that you are open to new things. Well, then this new candidate that's in, or this younger partner, or this younger physician, then it's like, great, that's what we hired, somebody to bring in fresh new ideas. And so we are open to hearing what you have to say, because we are an organization that likes to, this is one of our values.
Yeah, you know what, Brandon, I think that's a great thing. When we interview young doctors, we tell them, if you have a special interest, by all means, bring it over and we'll try to figure it out. But what I've been finding is, they have interest, but they want me to figure it out for them. I mean, why would I want to? I'm busy.
Yeah.
I stumbled upon this culture thing from remember, my practice is 58, 60 years old.
Mm-hmm.
They did things the way they did. And I just pounded my head against almost every single door until I broke it down,
Mm-hmm.
and that's where we are today. But I think physicians need to learn the team approach. Now, the one thing that we did really good was when we did our renovation in our new office. Herb, remember when he came over, we had all the doctors sitting in one room?
Yes. Yeah.
I don't know why we did that. I think it was by accident. But, you get to sit inside the room with all the doctors, all the generation, all the sexes and whatever, and you can talk about things. I know about everybody's kids' birthday and baseball game and who won what award, where in the old days when everybody had their own consultation office, this is my desk, my office. It becomes us and them, partners, employees, boys and girls, whatever you want. That's how it divides.
Yeah.
And I think bringing the people together into an office is good. I remember back in the day, Reichman, he's the guy that started the practice. He used to have an office on one side of the building, which was his desk, Dr. Reichman's desk. And all the rest of them stayed in the same size office, three guys in the other side. The guy was in Israel for 6 months a year. So I went over and I sat on his desk because that side was too crowded. His lead nurse came over to me. What are you doing? He says, I'm going to sit here because nobody's sitting here. Oh, you cannot sit there. That's Dr. Reichman's office. That's his desk. I said, but Dr. Reichman's in Israel. He won't know. But that's culture. You see? We got rid of that.
Well,
Yes.
that's what I was saying. Because there wasn't a definition of culture,
Yeah.
their culture was going to get created. You were creating the culture
Correct.
that wasn't there. So there was a culture, regardless of whether or not
Yeah.
the partners, the original partners, said it or not.
So
yeah,
let's get past the mission and vision and values. The next step is going to be, you said, setting the expectations of the people that you hire. So how do you hire? How do you personally, how do you evaluate a candidate? Run me through the whole process. Like
Wow,
say you're trying to hire someone from the front desk for for Salud Pediatrics. What would be the first thing that you would do?
So I have to mention that there has been a lot of work done prior to getting to that. So just the same way that a runner doesn't show up on the first day to run a marathon, right? There's like a ton of preparation that goes into that. So what I'm about to say, it's because we have been preparing for this marathon for many, many years, right? So,
Yes.
so because in order how you create clarity is by doing the vision and the mission and the values and all that. So that's one big aspect of it. So the first thing is like sort of aligning the team, creating a cohesive team. So that's step number one, creating a cohesive team. Step number two is clarity. And then by clarity is, why are we here? What do we do? What's expected of everybody? So all these things, how do we behave? That's the same. There's different things that you can do to do it. So like, for example, lately I've been getting a lot of work where people are asking me to find practice managers for them. And so they want to be like, hey, just go ahead and put an ad out, or like, here's what we're looking for. And I'm like, wait, let's back up just a little bit. I need to understand a little bit more about you. So that's why I want to sort of preface that. But once you already have that very clear, is that and this is not something that I created. I mean, anytime you look at organizational behavior, they'll say this, and in organizations that do this very, very well, this is one of the first things in their mind, is you hire for culture fit first, right? And then you hire for skill set second. But you first have to understand what it is exactly, because you can say, we're friendly, right? Let's just say that. A lot of people say that we're friendly, but friendly could be like, good evening, how's it going? Or friendly could be like, hello, how's it going? I mean, there's like different variations of friendly. So that's even just that word alone, defining it is very important. So what do? We have gone extensively on not only what our values are, but then after that is defining what the value is. And then after that, sort of like, here are the attributes that demonstrate this particular value according to us, right? So when I put out an ad, I'm looking for, you were mentioning like compassion, or I'm looking for somebody that has like a very customer service centric training. So like if they don't have any healthcare training, but if they work at a Starbucks, I'm going to at least talk to them for a little while, right? Because I know that they have people training, and that's what I want. Because another thing is, the only distinction, we're talking about before, the practice management side, but in terms of customer service, it's very difficult for parents to discern whether one doctor is better than the other. Everybody's a good food critic, everybody's a good wine critic, or whatever, right? But in terms of deciding, how do you determine whether a doctor is better than another? So the way that the parents evaluate us is by, customer service or convenience. Like, I got in there really quick, got out. That's great. That office is great. I got what I needed. I got my antibiotics, and then, I left. And but also, you know, the customer service aspect of it is very important to us, because I want to provide a different experience than they go, you know, that they go somewhere else. So for me, that's sort of the things, just one example of one of the things that I look at. The other thing is, so I meet with them. Also going back to sort of the team, we've gone really deep in understanding what the skill set of each team member is and sort of what their gifts are. Not only their skill set, but what their gifts are. I am not the greatest interviewer, for example. Well, I think I am a good interviewer, but I'm not necessarily a very good person to discern whether or not this person, like I usually give people the benefit of the doubt, frankly, that's what it is. But I have identified people in my organization that can, like in 5 minutes, they can sit down and they're like, they're not going to work, or they've got something else, or they're working right now at the hospital. They got a not so great shift. All they want to do is get out of the night shift, and then they're going to move on to something else. And we're providing, I mean, they're like, did you read all of that in these 5 minutes? They're really good.
I have to interrupt you there for a second, because I had this conversation at 7 a.m. today.
Really?
Yes. Didn't George? Didn't I just say,
Yeah.
You have to be careful when a nurse has been working in the hospital for 10 years in the OB department and wants to come and work at a pediatric office. Why is she doing that? Is she just tired of working weekends? And how long is she going to stay? Is she going to be okay with the much lesser acuity of a pediatric practice versus a delivery room? And it's upon you, the leadership of the practice, to ask, what is it that you want to do? And what is it that you don't want to do? Because that will tell you whether that person is just tired of the weekends, but she's not going to be, you know, she's an A player, but she's not going to fit and stay with you. And you're going to waste a lot of time training her. And then the headache of hiring someone else and going through the process again.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So that's why, so one thing that I wrote down here is that, you know, it's up to you as a leader to identify it. The thing is, the more I interview people and the more of these things that I'm doing, not only for my practice, I went to like an 18-month endeavor trying to hire people, because, you know, just like everybody else, we were short staffed. And then, so I did a ton of interviewing, and then I also did interviewing for a lot of people. Are very good at interviewing now, way better than they have ever been before, because the information's out there. Like, there's every single question known to mankind that has ever been asked is out there. They've read it and they've practiced it. And if they don't, then that's a problem. They're not already is a red flag. Right. Mm-hmm. So that's very difficult. So one of the things that we do, so I'm looking at, when I'm asking these questions, like sort of my thing is more like I try to not make it as like an interview, because people are really good at interviewing. So if it's more like a conversation, they tend to say things that, you know, that normally wouldn't, you know, like, hey, how's it going? So I try to, that's one technique that I use. But I'm looking also, and there are also, before this used to be an advantage, not so much, but using behavioral questions, right? So it's sort of like, tell me about a time when this and this and that. So I'll use it. People often ask me, like, what questions should I ask? Well, you can search them online. There's a gazillion of them, but a better way of doing it is circumstances that have happened in your practice where you're like, I didn't like the way this was, or this employee didn't do very well. Give them that scenario. It's like, hey, listen, you know, you have a to pick up your, you know, it's a baseball game and it's the final, and but we've got, you know, 3 patients that are coming in that we decided to, you know, but so what do you do? How would you act in that way? You know, like, how would you be? And it's like, well, no, my shift is at 5, I leave at 5, right? And so if you're looking for somebody that goes, and not to say that that's a bad thing, but I'm just like, if that's not one of your values, like we values like we go the extra mile no matter what, then, you know, like mission before family, mission before whatever, right? So it's fine that your kids are doing that, but hey, my husband is over there, I'll get there later. Or if the person says, well, before leaving, I would, I don't know, ask to see if they need my help, right? I'm like, okay, well, that's somebody that has more of what we're looking for. Anyways, that's one way that I sort of do it. Go ahead. No, I was just going to say that the process is extensive, and there's a reason why it's extensive.
And then, so you subscribe to hire very slowly, fire fast.
Well, do you want the practice manager answer to that, or do you want the consultant answer to that?
With both.
Both. Okay. So this is very similar to the advice that pediatricians give when they don't have any kids. It's like 2 hour screen time. You have to, the baby can't sleep in the bed like that. When you got your third kid, you're like, sure, he can watch, like, you got to rest at some point, don't you, mom? And that, so it's like different advice. This is the same way we would not, same advice. I mean, same thing happens when I'm a consultant versus a practice manager. I would like to say that I hire slow. Yes, I do. Fire fast. I'll be frank, I'm not that great at it because I don't like conflict, right? I'm just so
You're nice.
Yeah, it's very difficult for me to do it, right? In fortunately or unfortunately, the skill set, the personality, we tend to be a bunch that we're like, why don't we just all can't we just all get along? We don't have anybody that's sort of like, not that likes conflict, but sort of is not afraid of it. So knowing that that's a weakness, then I do have to make an extra effort to do it. But so to be very honest, but yes, the consultant answer would be yes, slow to hire, fast to fire. The practice manager is sort of like, oof, but then if I fire, how long is it going to take me to find? So it's not like I've got like an army of people waiting to jump on board here. So this is going to take me another 18 months. I'm just going to go ahead and deal with this person, which is not the right thing to do. I know. And sometimes it comes to bite me in the rear end afterwards, right? But there's a lot more considerations.
But
so what
that's,
we do
that's the art of practice management too, right? So I may know as a physician, I have to cut your foot off. That's the only solution to the problem you have. But the art of that is saying, well, he's not ready yet to give up his foot. Eventually, he'll come to that conclusion. And yes, we're running some risk because the longer the infected foot stays there, the more likely he might have a bacteria in his blood and get into sepsis and blah, blah, blah. But, I'm going to give him a couple of days to come to peace with that. That's the art, I think, of managing.
Yeah.
Do you
and that
use
conflict,
any?
that conflict is one thing that I'm overcoming. That is, I have more frequent check-ins with staff members. And so just the same, if you think about it, like, again, I keep going back to the sports thing, but just even a director, like there are constant check-ins with the team, right? Like the director only has one job, and that job is to ensure that the team is, or the musicians are doing what they need to do. The coach is sort of like, he's got his job, but he's watching the whole time everything that's going on. Like he's there observing, and then if there's some, hey, you're not covering number 44, like he's like immediately giving feedback. So that's what I'm trying to do, and the reason for that is that because if the problem doesn't get addressed sooner rather than later, then it becomes a lot more difficult. So then by the time, like if I've written you up 3 times and then it's like they know, like if you're late one more time, then you're going to be gone. Then they just don't show up, right? Because they know what's coming. So it's sort of that's another thing that's under done in an office, is that setting proper expectations. It's sort of like, we need to get rid of this person. They didn't do this. I'm like, well, did they know they were supposed to do it? Were they given the opportunity? Were they given the tools? Were they prepared? Do they have the capability of doing what you're asking of them? Like all these different stuff. Yeah. But anyways.
So, do you use any standardized behavioral tests like the Big Five or the DISC inventory?
We do. The DISC is one of my favorite. They're all good. I think they're all good. DISC was the one that I used the most. And lately I've been using one called 6 Geniuses. It's by the Table Group. If you look at thetablегroup.com, the only disclosure that I have is that I'm certified in that. I'm not certified in this, but I am certified in the 6 Geniuses, but I have no financial relationship, no deal with them. But
so what is the 6 Geniuses?
Oh man, how much time do we have?
No, the reason I like the Big Five is because it tests for people who are very neurotic. So usually if somebody's very neurotic within your team, it just throws everything off. So
the reason this is different, because the DISC is more a character assessment test, or the Myers-Briggs or whatever. This is more it's 2 things, but it's more of a productivity tool. So what is it that you're really, really good at? Or what and really what it is what gives you joy? Because I actually do this presentation about I tie this into a burnout talk that I do. But this is about a productivity tool. So it's about finding what gives the person joy. And that's referred to the 6 geniuses. The geniuses essentially are the things that you're naturally good at. So there are two things. Every job is a 6 genius job, essentially. Two of them is the things that give you joy. That's on one end. On the other end, these are the two things that deplete all the joy.
Okay.
And then there are things that they're your competencies that you're pretty good at. You can do them very well, but it's not really sustainable. Like after a while, you lose steam. So the way I like to describe it is sort of like there's a coffee cup that never loses its heat, right? It's like one of those Yeti cups or whatever. Like once you put that in there, so it just constantly energizing it. Then on the other end, then the middle one is sort of the one. It's like the coffee with the lid without the lid, right? So eventually it's hot, but eventually it's going to dissipate the heat. And then the last one, you're competing, what they refer to as your working frustrations. That one's like the coffee cup with no lid, and it actually has holes in it. So it's just depleting. So that's what I do. And I rely a ton on that, because when I was saying that I have a good understanding of my team, this is how I know who do I go to, who has the better discernment to go with the team. So when you're asking me about what steps do I do, is in addition to that first screening, we interview the person 3, 4, 5 times, different people. And it doesn't matter what status you have within the organization. You can be a front desk person, or you can be the physician. You're probably going to go through and meet almost everybody. And everybody has different skill set, right? Everybody has a different genius. Everybody has a different way, whatever. And then they're able to contribute different, and then you get a much better perspective as opposed to just me relying on this person. But we also get a good sense of their behavior, because it's very difficult for somebody to maintain that sort of person. So essentially, when you meet somebody in an interview, you're meeting their representative. You're not meeting them. You're meeting their best version of themselves. Just the same way I'm going to portray the best. I'm like, you'd be a fool not to join our practice because I'm the greatest boss in the world. I'm the greatest, practice administrator. But they don't really know that. Just the same way I don't know that you are the greatest employee in the world. So there's only one way to find out is to get to know you. So we try to put the potential candidates in situations where they're not unique. And by unique, I mean sort of the standard interview process. So they might be doing a shadowing day, but we'll ask them and say, hey, do you mind grabbing that here for us real quick? Like that, they're just shadowing day. And then, so if they're like, they get upset or offended of it, this isn't somebody that has a serving heart, a serving attitude. Like, so we're actually interviewing them while we're working, we're asking them questions. We're like, hey, by the way, can you go real quick, and that room needs to be clean, and we'll continue. And I'm going to let this patient come in. And then it's like, what do I need to do? Where do I just go clean it up real quick. And then we'll just throw things out like that to see, how they do it. Or if they're clinical staff, if they make a comment on the kid's shoes, or, are they trying to help? Or if the mom is having a hard time for the vaccines, that they're helping, whatever the case might be, And then we also, so going back to the personality assessment test. Now, the personality assessment test or the geniuses, I don't do them as a screening process, though. It's not like I need somebody that has these skill set. I don't use that as a determining factor on whether or not we're going to hire them. I just use it to have a better understanding of what makes that person tick. So if a person is not very good at, I don't know, there's some people that, let's go say they're direct to the point. They don't like to, like me, I tell long stories. I talk a lot. They're like, Brandon, just get to the point. Just get to the point. Generally, that person is not going to be a very good customer service person, right? Because they're sort of like, they're going to get bored with it, or answer or get to the point, or they already know the answer. Where me, I'll be, isn't that interesting? No. So it allows me to help me to become a better leader, is to put them in the right position, because I oftentimes things that we measure people, like I think somebody said this, and I used to think it was Einstein. I looked it up, and it turns out that Einstein didn't say, but it's still attributed to him. Like if you measure a fish by its ability to walk, it's going to be a failure. So I sort of come under the premise that everybody's good at something. We just need to find what that good is. And then if we can't, because it's not there, then we need to make a decision on whether you move on, or we put you in another position, or we do something else. But yeah, that's the way I use that.
The reason I like the Big Five is because it measures for conscientiousness and agreeability. And if you're trying to build a team and you have someone that's conscientious and agreeable, is sort of what you were alluding to before, that you can have healthy conflict. You have good team players. Everybody's rowing in the same direction. If you have, and we see this a lot in medicine, if you suffer from the smartest person in the room all the time syndrome, those people are extremely difficult to have them be part of your team.
Yeah.
And no matter what you say, like you show them the KPIs, you do this. It's difficult. It's very difficult because they already know, and they know everything. And everything is an affront to them when you bring up something that's not right.
No, I mean, I follow the agreeable, for example, if you want somebody that's agreeable, at the same time, that could be a problem, right? Because you don't want
Yes.
somebody just to say yes, just because they said yes. So you want somebody
Yes.
to speak up. And generally what happens is that the loudest voices are the ones that always are heard, right? And then nobody takes the time to, wait 1 second, let me hear what you have to say, right? So knowing that this person has the gift of discernment, for example, they might be an introvert, but they might have excellent discernment. This one's a loudmouth, has no discernment whatsoever, but we tend to always follow this guy right here because it has the loudest mouth. Where we should be understanding, it's like, no, wait, I've identified that this person has discernment. Give me 1 second. I want to hear what Rachel has to say,
Yeah. So let's recap. So first thing is you have to know what your mission, your vision, and your values are from the leadership, either the owners or the board of directors. Then you have to have a very clear expectation of what you want your team to look like. Yours seems like, from what you're telling me, is so, dude, pediatrics is very in tune with customer satisfaction. So you want people that are going to treat the customer the best possible every single time.
Correct. We go one of is going the extra mile. One of our values, go the extra mile.
And then before you go out and hire, you really need to know what your expectations are for that position. Whether it's a bus driver or the person that gets off the bus and that's the kids into safety, or whatever the position is, you have to have a very clear definition of how you're going to measure their success. As you mentioned, you don't measure.
Do they embody? First of all, do they embody the values of the organization? That's very important.
And then, but I was going to get there. So if you're hiring a front desk person, I would imagine from this conversation, you want somebody that's very upbeat, that is very much in love with kids, and that is able to quickly resolve a conflict with a parent, whatever that is. They're late, they're early. They thought they were going to bring both kids in today, but I only had one appointment for one kid, and she's not going to get ruffled by that. She's going to try to resolve it quickly, kindly, and to the customer satisfaction. Without throwing the practice under the bus, right? Because somebody walks in with 4 kids and she wants physicals for all of them. That's just not going to happen. And then once you set what you want out of that position, when you go out about interviewing them, you're going to show them what your values are, how you define your values, how you expect every team member to live up to those values. And if they're not okay with that, the process stops there.
Yeah, that's a good way to summarize it. Yes.
And then you have them come in, they do a day that they shadow somebody or several people around the office to make sure that they do embody those values. And then the last thing you're going to look at is the competency. And then hopefully, because you've built a scorecard of what you wanted them to do before you even put the ad on the paper, you can sit down with them every 90 days and say, well, we agreed, Herb, that you were going to see 20 patients a day, and you're only seeing 10 a day. Why are you falling short? Are we not scheduling correctly? Are you falling behind? What can we do to make sure we get to the 20 patients we agreed on?
Right.
And that's how you build a very healthy culture.
Yeah. I mean, it's the healthy, it's also reinforcing the clarity. So it's not just simply, following these steps, but then that every single so there's other ways, like in meetings, reinforcing why are we here, or because people tend to forget. So there's a deliberate, constant sort of there's no such thing as over communication, by the way. That's another thing that I've learned, that it's sort of like, I already said this, they should have learned it, right? And it's like, no, you need to say it all the time. And if they're not mimicking me, if they're not sort of, like Brandon says, and they're imitating me, then it's like, I haven't communicated this enough. That's sort of my benchmark. But generally speaking, broad strokes, yes. But the essentially is putting the right, the Collins, Jim Collins,
putting the
from
right
Good to Great
people
on the
on the
bus.
right
Yeah.
seat on the bus.
Exactly. It's all about that. And that requires a lot of effort. Lately, one thing that I did with this new batch of people, just because we were so understaffed that we didn't even have enough time or I could pull people away to interview them. And so we were sort of fast tracking, but we didn't want to compromise the process, right? Because the staff was like, we would much rather endure what we're enduring right now of being short for than to hire somebody that's not going to work with us. They were the ones that told me, they're like, no, that person, I'd rather, okay. So what I did is I gave him a proposition to the candidates. I'm like, hey, listen, how about if we give you 2 weeks, I'm going to pay you, and but it's going to be sort of like an onboarding training process. So for 1 week, you're going to train on the system, or EMR. They've got a whole bunch of training modules, and the morning you'll do that, and in the afternoon you'll do the shadowing, and then we'll touch base at the 1 week, and then we'll touch base at the second week, and if we both agree, then we'll move forward. And to one candidate, actually 2 candidates, that I wasn't sure about them, I offered them money right on the spot. I'm like, the job or $1,000, a check. I can write you a check for $1,000, no questions asked right now, or the job. And they're like, the job. And so, I'm like, okay, cool. And I was prepared to write a check because I wasn't quite sure, for this person. But that's what I've been doing. And so what we were running into is that they were very good at sort of telling us what we wanted, and then when they were actually on the job, they weren't quite working out. So this was a way to sort of mitigate that, to sort of fast track them, just have less interviews, do a shadowing, and then do a 2 week, and I would pay them in whatever we negotiated their going rate, and I'm like, hey, this is an opportunity for you to know if you want to, because you don't want to be looking for a job in 2 months from now, 3 months from now. I certainly don't want to be looking for a new MA. How about if we do this? Everybody agreed. They thought it was a great idea. In fact, the staff, the candidates, they were all on board with it, and then, so yeah, that's another thing that I just started doing.
That's a great idea. Now, how important do you think is the role of the person that answers your phone? And when I say your phone, I'm talking about Salute Pediatrics.
Yeah.
And the person that greets your customers at Salute Pediatrics.
I think that the front desk is the most undervalued, most underappreciated department in a practice, and they're generally the least compensated as well. And as a result, that's why a lot of the problems, result. And they don't have hardly any training, and they have to deal with, every doctor, because there's not everybody's clear aligned and things haven't been sorted out. You have one doctor's like, well, don't schedule me newborns on Tuesdays afternoons, but I'm okay on doing ADHD on Friday mornings, but every other Friday, because I have this going, and then they have to keep track of all these things, that's just one example. So how important? It's incredibly important, because just merely on the customer service fact, the first 20 seconds, 30 seconds is the most important. And in the last 30 seconds, well, guess who is the one that gets to see the patient the first 30 seconds? Okay, the front desk. They're the ones that answer the phones, of course, but they're also depending on at least in my office, but many other offices as well, they're sort of the air traffic controllers of the practice, right? So because they know who's coming in, they've made the appointments. This whole notion about like, well, you should separate your phones from the front desk. Well, it's great if you got a humongous department and you can afford to have people just answering the phones. But if you're a small practice, 4 doctors with us, 3 doctors sometimes, it's a very small staff. And so the people that check in, people that collect, people are the same people that answer the phones. And they call back the pharmacy and whatever, and all these other things. And so they're very important, but so they know what's coming in because they made the appointments. They know the patient's story. They know all these things. Then they can see if they're getting backed up. And so there needs to be a constant communication with the back to let them know, what's going on. And then the back, of course, needs to also let them know. But usually the tone is set by the front desk in terms of how that works, because the clinical staff obviously is just, focused on that, where the front desk needs to have a little bit more, they need to be in tune not only with the incoming, but the outgoing, and then what the internal back and forth dynamic is of, for the patient. So they can make or break a patient workflow. I mean, they oftentimes it's the doctors are the bottlenecks, whatever. There's only so much that we can do with that, because, if you get a kid that's very complicated, you're not just going to walk out. You got to finish that deal, But they can make or break that, or they can, and they also have at least in my office, I give them the autonomy where, like, we've all waited, for example, we've all waited for flights, and it's terrible to wait for flights. Same thing as terrible waiting for the doctor. But when I've been in situations where the staff keeps you updated or the captain keeps you updated, it doesn't make it better, but it certainly doesn't make the waiting worse, right? Where you're just sitting there and not on the tarmac and you're like, what is going on? I see all these planes leaving and we're still sitting here. You know, if the guy would jump on there and be like, or the gal, hey, we're doing this, we're waiting because of whatever. Okay, oh, well, that makes sense. Well, then, you know, I'll update you in 20 minutes. Anyways, the front desk would be the one that would know that, right? Hey, and so, I mean, if I can continue hitting on this dead horse until nobody's, you know, and the very, very, very more important than what people give them credit for.
Yes. That's the face of your practice, right? Both on the phone and when the person walks in. And if they ruin that
service operations, yep, everything.
If they ruin that handoff either on the phone or when they're greeting the patient, you're done. The rest of the visit's misery. The parent's going to come in with a scowl on their face, and now I got to work twice as hard to convince them to take their shots and vaccinate the kid. And I'm miserable because I can feel that anger that the parents, you know, now they're just in a bad mood.
Yeah, and they take a lot of heat too. They take a lot of heat from parents because, you know, they'll take the heat there, and then when the parent goes in the back, they're like, "Hi, doc, how's it going?" You know, they're really nice to the doctor and everything. They're not so nice to the front desk. So, so that they take a lot of heat from parents. And why are we waiting? Or why the co-payment? And, you know, why do I have to have my card? You know, like all these different things. Can't somebody see my kid? My kid's been sick. So here's the thing that I tell them. There's a lot of the stuff that I tell my front desk is that, you know, just about every single other establishment, they start out with, you know, like the whole rating system with 5 stars. Right. And so you, as the service, you know, declines or is not, you know, if your food is cold or if you're not seen on time and everything, you know, or like there's a long, like, you know, like Target, there's like 37, you know, cash registers and only 1 open. So 1 star less. Like every single one of those is sort of 1 star less. We are like the lost baggage claim at the airport. Nobody that comes to the office wants to be there, first of all. Second, nobody goes to the lost baggage claim and says, "Hey, I want to thank you for my bag arriving on time here. This was great. I really appreciate it." No, if they're down there, there's a problem. Well, there's even a wellness visit, which is supposed to be a good thing, and it is. We're still undressing you. We're poking you. Like, we're not doing the greatest. We're not doing, as far as the patient's concerned, like, this is like, what, this is a good thing for me? What are you crazy?
That's
Anyways.
right. Yes.
So we are starting with at best 2 stars if they're a fan, if they like the doctor. So our job is to just not lose any stars. Basically, you know, maybe get to 3, but we're starting basically maybe with 1 star. And if it's sort of a parent that just had a rough night, and then it's like the kid hasn't, you know, like this cough doesn't go away. The mom's already lost 3 days of work. The dad's lost 2. And that morning they had a fight because the guy has a sales presentation and the mom has an operations meeting. And it's like, I'm going to get fired if I take another day. And we're like, "Hello, welcome to Salute Pediatrics." They're like, "There's nothing good up, you know." So it's sort of managing that sort of stuff is very important.
And managing the stars is very hard too, because, you know, if you look on a lot of doctor review sites, it's always a complaint.
Of course.
Nobody ever goes to say, "I love Dr. Bravo. He's the best doctor ever." Very rare.
Unless you're a plastic surgeon.
Yeah. Well, that's a
different
story.
But you know, I mean, he's absolutely right. And when you go to the doctor, it's not a happy occasion. It's not like when you go grab a beer with your friends at the bar on a sunny day. It's like, you know, you got to drag yourself there.
Yeah.
So that's what makes it a difficult business.
Well, the good news though is that the bar is very low in healthcare. So when you look at studies about customer service, they'll put us with airlines, which is a terrible experience with TSA, with this whole thing. So that's the bad news. And then but the good news is that the bar is so low that it doesn't require much to sort of do a good job.
That's true. That's a great way to look at it.
Yeah. So that's what I aim for. I'm like, hey, we just have to jump just a little bit higher and we're there.
Yeah.
Well,
but speaking of airlines, like now they renovated the entire LaGuardia airport. Let me tell you, the Delta terminal is fantastic. TSA is fantastic over there. You go in, You're right in through security. You're done. It's actually a pleasure. There's never a line.
Well,
They got the work
that brings a
plan.
good point. A good point to look at your office and be like, when was the last time I renovated this
Yeah.
place, as far as patient experience, right? And even the
Yeah.
culture, like if your culture is sort of a culture of warmth, of, I don't know, of compassion and stuff like that, you know, like look at Starbucks. When, like, if you read their values and look at their mission and stuff, and you go to their stores, you're like, yeah, this feels like it. Apple, same thing. The store feels exactly what, you know, what you know. So anyways, the people that do this very well, if you study those organizations, you know, the airline, for example, like another people that do this very well is Southwest Airlines, right? They make no bones about the fact that they're the cheapest ones, and things are cheaper, but they also don't compromise on other things, right? So, and their service reflects that, right? When you travel, if you've ever traveled with Southwest, you understand. Although I think they've gone through different management, things have changed just a little bit, but historically they're completely different. But that's one company that actually focuses a ton on culture. That's culture first, and then skill set second. And if you go to their website and you look at sort of what their values are, it's like friendliness and connecting people. It's nothing about transportation. It's sort of, we're connecting people. So if you show up and you want to get on a plane early, they're not dealing with this whole, well, you got to pay us a fee and all this other stuff. It's sort of like, because our purpose, our mission here is to ensure that you get to your destination no matter what. So the person at the counter is running through this filter, doesn't need a supervisor to approve for this person to jump on this. Hey, is there let me see. Yeah, there's an empty seat. The plane's leaving. Nobody else. Everybody's checked in. Jump on, because and that's how you also keep people on task. But you have to communicate that. What do we do? We connect people, right? And we customer service. We're friendly. Like, check. Is it costing us any money? Because they're really big on low fares, right? Or is this thing going to delay the flight? Is this going to cause anything that's going to? No, it's not. In fact, it's going to free up a spot on another plane. So therefore, boom, they're on there. And that's an example of having somebody that has a very clear, or an organization that's very clear about that, you know, what their goals are, what their vision, what their mission, and then communicating that to the staff, and then giving them the autonomy to execute. And then it's the last competitive advantage. Eventually, we talk about the financials, then that's, people are going to come to you, or you're going to have a good reputation. Like, then the money comes afterwards. That's where sort of to tie this back in, when all these things are aligned.
Well, aligning that to medicine, Herb, I have to say, if you do good quality, the money will follow. Good quality medicine, then the money will follow. If you follow the money, you'll never do good quality.
Yeah, unfortunately, I think to his point, which is absolutely right, what we as physicians define as quality is different than the customer, what they define as quality. And so we have to play both sides of that card.
Yeah.
You know, not only do I have to do good medicine, but I have to provide a somewhat pleasant experience in a trying circumstance. Because when you have a sick child, it's a trying circumstance. Even if I get the diagnosis of the ear infection right and the amoxicillin dosage right, and the kid's better, the parents haven't slept, the kid's miserable, and you know, we have to take care of that customer expectation too.
Yeah. All right.
So both come. Well, there's been a wonderful hour and a half, and very insightful. Thank you for sharing your time this morning with us. We look forward to seeing you sometime.
I enjoyed it very much, and thank you for the invite. And love the discussion. And I actually learned a whole bunch of things too about the whole sort of started falling into place. So I appreciate that insight.
Great. I hope we see you again in the show sometime soon.
All right.
Thank you.
Right. Have a wonderful day.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening. This has been a production of the Pediatric Lounge. On the show notes, you will find links to our co-host and other important notes, as well as a timetable of the topics discussed today. Don't forget to follow us on social media and subscribe to wherever you listen to your podcast. Leave us a great review, as it helps us greatly. In the meantime, we will see you next week. The Pediatric Lounge. The conversations are not intended as medical advice, and the opinions expressed are solely those of the host and the guest.